Um, okay, so we've got some test slides first. Good. I'm going to start with this. Carl Sagan, one of the most enigmatic astronomers, astrophysicists, astrobiologists, has once said that you have to know the past in order to understand the present. And when I was writing the slides for this talk, I realized that obviously the kind of stuff I'm going to talk about, it will really, really hard for the people to resonate with because they certainly don't have my experience. I mean, not that I have such a amazing experience and I've had like amazing upbringing, but it's certainly very different from what most people would have. And I decided to share this in the first couple of slides and then go back into the main topic. And so since I'm in control of this presentation, I want to reverse back time. And in fact, I want to reverse it as much as 1995. And 1995 was actually quite amazing year, not only in terms of pop culture. Obviously, we have a lot of great songs, a lot of great movies. Of course, one of the most epic software releases, Windows 95, everybody will remember that. And I didn't know up until I was writing the slides, but actually Kevin Mitnick was caught in 1995, so it was pretty eventful year. But for me, 1995 was amazing because of these guys. And the reason I mention these guys is because, funny enough, this is what got me into security. So I run to the VHS store, I found the movie Hackers. My dad actually sent me to get a completely different movie, but at that point I was in wrestling and allegedly hackers. And as soon as I saw the movie, I realized this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. Obviously, at that point, I didn't know that I can actually profit from it, and in fact, even use it for, as a means to actually, cater for my family and that kind of stuff. So, basically, in those days were very, very different. So when I was growing up in this hacking scene, on the hacking community, one thing that I think that a lot of people forget about is that the hacking scene was actually about three things, generally speaking. And the first one is knowledge. Now, I know that a lot of people look at the movie Hackers and think, well, this is a bit of BS because, that's not how software works. But I think that from a cultural perspective, Hackers was actually quite nailed it down. So the first one is actually about knowledge. Now, in this scene here, we see I think the Phantom Freak, something like that, talking to Zero Cool about some books that he got from the library, like compiler design and Dragon Book, really, really old school computer science books. And it was all about basically getting knowledge in these days, and he had to be actually passionate. He wanted to know everything about everything. The second main thing was actually prestige. And again, this is something that in 2018 we didn't actually talk about too much, but the fact of the matter is that in those days, it was very, very difficult to monetize your security skills. I mean, unless you go on the, like a black hat or something. But even then, it was not so easy to actually make money out of this stuff. And so the only reward you'll get back was in fact, the acceptance from the community, the community, the appreciation of your skills from your friends and the people that you hang out with. And last but not least, it was all about the community itself. So basically, this is when we started getting these conferences like DevSecCon and Black Hat coming up. Originally very, very small. Obviously, Open DevSecCon is a good example. Small conference right now is actually quite big. And so access to this community really, really mattered. So as soon as, this is, for me, is the romantic age of the hacking scene. Because very, very quickly after that, as soon as I got into London, I got into the information security scene. I started actually working as a penetration tester for a few companies and in-house security teams. And from my perspective, we have about 4 different milestones in the security space that I have personally experienced. Now, obviously, this is very biased. I put these slides. But the way I see it is that we started with pen testing, which was actually quite a big milestone. A lot of people were involved in the pen testing industry. In fact, when I joined the pen testing industry, it was kind of pretty big. And then we have vulnerability programs, bug bounties, and these days and age we're talking about this sort of synergetic relationship with development and security. And so, pen testing. Oh, sorry, I wanted to mention, funny enough, of course, that works in my favor, but it almost seems that they're actually 5 years apart. Now, I know DevSecOps is not really like invented in 2018, but it seems to me that we're at the peak year. So almost as if there is some sort of a sign, if you believe in that kind of stuff. So, pen testing and red teams. I just wanted to cover this very, very quickly. Basically, these days and age, we talk about red teams as if something completely new. I mean, this is basically another way to repackage an old product. Red teams existed since the dawn of pen testing, and in fact, when I joined a company, mind you, in Rochester, a security company that delivers penetration tests, I felt I was part of a red team because we had people that were doing all kinds of different stuff, from social engineering. We had like a guy who was working in the physical side of things. We had people who were developers and so on. And so it was actually a real red team. And of course, we know what pen testers are about, but this to me, at this days and age, although pen testing red teams are still used as a function of security, I believe that they're less relevant, and I'll cover this in a second. The next key milestone is the so-called vulnerability acquisition programs. And so for me, that experience started about 2005, 2006, and the zero-day initiative, in fact, was actually created in 2007, and Pwn-to-Own competition quickly followed after that. And so the purpose of these programs really is that people realize that, hang on, I mean, pen testing is great, and red teams are great. Of course, we have this sort of security industry going on that does this sort of services, but the bottom line is that there are a lot of vulnerabilities out there, and the bottom line is there's a lot of people who actually have access to that information, and what we want to do, we want to acquire that information from them, and of course, we pay them money for that. One thing that is quite interesting is that if you look at for example, the cost of acquisition of vulnerabilities between 2005 and 2018, there is actually quite a drastic difference. Now, back in the days when I was a penetration tester, vulnerabilities, and I'm going to refer back to this point about prestige, vulnerabilities and vulnerability disclosure was nothing but essentially means to attract more customers. Because you can show that actually you can do these things. And since you can't monetize directly from the vulnerability that you're finding, of course you're doing, you're making the world a better place and all that. But the fact of the matter is that you use the vulnerability as means to attract customers, and you blog about them, you go to conferences, talk about them. And so as soon as these vulnerability acquisition programs came out, I mean, the top prices, I mean, obviously I'm not talking about the black market, and I can share you a lot of interesting stories after this talk about this, but funny approaches on the internet. But the thing is this, is that what potentially, and again, this is actually something, maybe I'll be completely misrepresenting the situation, but as far as I remember, something that would have costed like $10,000 in 2005 for remote code execution vulnerability in Windows. I mean, this was actually an official acquisition program. These days and age will cost at least $500,000 for the same vulnerability. So it's an order of magnitude more. And the next thing, the next milestone, is the whole existence of this the initiation of this public or crowdsourced penetration testing services, Bugcrowd and HackerOne, which came a little bit later after Bugcrowd, but basically they came around 2012. I believe Bugcrowd actually was formed as a company in 2012, and the whole point of this vulnerability programs, if you like, is that clients who are already ready and they were okay for people to test their public systems, they'll participate in these programs, and essentially now you can crowdsource the whole world, and they can test your systems, and obviously because of that, instead of paying for a single team to do the pen test, you can get like, I don't know, 10 teams to actually do the pen test for you. and as a result of that, get more benefit. Again, I want to talk about price because this is, I think it's important. The interesting thing is about this vulnerability programs is that many of you probably don't realize actually how profitable they can be for some penetration testers or some people who are in these programs. I actually know people who are literally millionaires doing this sort of stuff. But the thing is that you would expect some of these programs to actually pay from 10,000 to 100,000 depending on the exploit that you're actually giving away. Funny enough, when Facebook was hacked actually several weeks ago, I was wondering, do you know what? They could have probably got quite a bit of money from this if they actually went straight to Facebook and said, you know, we've got a way to extract that data. I mean, probably that would have been more than what Facebook was, you know, officially giving, probably like 3 or 4 times that, maybe even not more, just to cover it up. But, you know, they realized that money, you know, probably you can imagine that if you're at that point, money is nothing. You can actually use it for other purposes rather than actually getting paid. The other thing that I want to mention about this is that when I got into the security scene, for example, vulnerabilities like cross-site scripting, which a lot of people would think, okay, they were, you know, the worst, basically, and everybody who was sharing that sort of stuff were basically worthless. You know, now, these days, actually get paid quite a bit of money for the same type of vulnerabilities. And here we are in the DevSecOps phase, which is all about continuous integration, continuous delivery, which I believe is also another milestone, essentially trying to solve the exact same problems that all of these other things have tried to solve in their own way. But now we are basically, you know, this movement shift to the left, we're trying to actually solve this issue by embedding processes within, you know, how we deliver software. And this is an example of a software delivery pipeline. I mean, I understand that this is not a complete one, so don't judge me on this, but this is just for illustration purposes. The way DevSecOps works is that you have that pipeline, you put some stuff maybe at the testing phase or at the monitoring phase or deploy phase, and essentially call it a day. You know, now you can deploy 60 times a day without touching base with the security team. So what's the point of the whole this? Well, it's been always about this two group of people. I mean, it's always been about the group, you know, about hackers and the developers, or like, you know, the offensive team and the defensive team. And from my experience, I've actually sat in both sides of the fence. So, you know, you see the world very, very differently as being from the offensive side than actually the way you see it from the defensive side. And what I wanted to say is that we are kind of at the peak point, I mean, somewhere over there, where we've tried all these other new approaches, but somehow they didn't work. So right now we're talking about this this convergence, this thing called DevSecOps. So I had the opportunity for the past 6 months to work with some brilliant backend engineers. And although I knew about DevSecOps from the very, very beginning, as Francois mentioned, it didn't actually occur to me the potential of that model up until recently. And that's why I believe from someone like me who have spent most of their time on the offensive side of things, it was almost like a breakthrough idea. I mean, almost like a breakthrough awakening, and I realized, hang on, this is something quite important, this is a milestone, and we need to actually prepare ourselves to actually do better in the next at least 5 years until we hit the next cycle of something new. And so because of that, I started this project called Open DevSecOps, and bluntly putting open back into the DevSecOps model has never been close, but you know, if you can come up with a better subtitle, you know, please let me know. So why did I start this project? Well, if you come back to the continuous integration pipeline or continuous delivery pipeline, we have this sort of checkpoints where we can insert security gates, but the actual problem is that what do we put in there? You know, and it's really easy to explain what DevSecOps looks like. It's very easy to explain what the secure development lifecycle looks like. But when it comes down to implementation, I believe that a lot of people get stuck because they say stuff like, well, we want to inject some developer-friendly tools. Maybe we want to do static source analyzer. You know, we can do you know, dynamic application scanners, that kind of a stuff. I mean, there is nothing new about this stuff. This stuff existed for many, many years. And they don't necessarily need to be part of your pipeline unless you're pushing to production 60 times a day. So the other thing, which is quite fundamental that we need to understand, not just like what we're going to put in those particular checkpoints, But the other thing that we need to understand is that infrastructure is also code these days. And so, I mean, I know that there's a lot of organizations, as I heard this morning, banking world moves back to virtual machines, which is great, or physical boxes. But the thing is that we have access to this thing called the cloud. And the cloud, actually, in the face of AWS and Google, is quite sophisticated. So we can build very, very complex infrastructure, so very, very complex applications, which were literally impossible to do, especially pulled out by a very small team single-handedly like 10 years ago. And we have a lot of supporting tools that actually allow us to do that. We have Terraform, we have AWS CloudFormation that will allow us to spun those complex infrastructure quite easily. So where I'm getting with this is that we've got this convergence between DevSecOps and I'll say SecOps. I mean, they almost become, to some extent, undistinguishable if you look at it on the surface of it, especially in organizations which are entirely software-driven. Everything in that organization is just software, from the infrastructure to operations to the actual product that they're making and everything else. So, getting back to the Open DevSecOps model, the Open DevSecOps project, it is about essentially these three pillars that I'm going to cover very, very briefly. And so the first one, which when I was setting up the project, just coming back from my experience, what I realized is that the first one, which is very important, is actually access to knowledge. I realized there's a lot of resources out there like OWASP and so on and so forth, but a lot of these resources, in my opinion, they're written with a developer mindset, which is great. There's nothing bad about it, but it's not the way a offensive a person would write it. No, offensive, sorry. A person who is sitting on the offensive security side of things, right? I mean, they have a very, very different approach to the people who sit on the defensive side of things. So I think it will be fundamental, when building a project like this, is to have access to knowledge, but knowledge which is very, very different from what is already available. And it's early days, but we started putting together some, of course, we're using GitHub for all this. As through DevSecOps engineers. We basically started putting some conversations, everyone can join, and essentially start off the conversation about gathering knowledge and just putting stuff together, everything in source format. The second thing is access to community, again, referencing back to my slides from the very beginning. I think is also quite important now. The DevSecCon conference is actually a great platform for information exchange and access to community. Not many probably realize how important it is to actually, know people. There is a lot of information that is shared, but it's not shared openly, and it's a very covert way of sharing information still. There's channels and so on and so forth. So I'm hoping that this project can improve on that kind of conversation. And of course, this is just an example. We've got people, not many, but this counter is actually going up pretty much every day. And last but not least, and this is what I want to spend the second half of the presentation, is actually coming up with tools, but more specifically with solutions which will sit into the DevSecOps model pipeline. And so I want to show you just three examples of tools and then some broader vision of what I have in mind. So honey tokens were already mentioned this morning. And so the idea of a honey token is that as part of, and again, when I actually talk about this stuff, just try to think of in terms of not just the code that you write, but actually the infrastructure that you build, so everything is together, right? And actually, before I open this, I wanted to cover something else. I was recently asked if you have a situation where a developer is making the same security mistakes over and over again, what are you going to do about it, right? I mean, you can sit down with them and explain that they're doing it wrong, but the right answer to this question is that, I mean, obviously the developer maybe have some sort of problem maybe understanding the subject, but the simple matter that the actual technology allows this to happen to begin with, it's the core of the issue, right? So it's not the case of penalizing the developers. It's actually improving the technology to such an extent that actually this is no longer an issue. It doesn't matter what who the developer is. Anyway, going back to the honey tokens. So the whole idea is this. The whole idea is that if I generate some access credentials, for example, access tokens from AWS or maybe whatever that is, I can I can just spread them around in my infrastructure. Maybe I can put them as part of some Lambda functions. Maybe I can put them in some Docker containers. Maybe I can put them in, maybe I can put them in some text files that lay here and there. But the whole idea is that as soon as somebody uses these tokens to access my system, I know that this is abnormal behavior. I don't need a CM to tell me that. Why? Because that's not what this stuff are meant for. They're not used as part of the application. They don't serve application function. And so this is a very effective way, in fact, to catch a breach almost at the very, very early phase, when the attacker doesn't know what this application is all about, or the environment, what it's about, and they quite literally be tempted to use some of these access tokens to infiltrate the application further. But the beauty of this is that if you have this stuff already spread out everywhere, this means that they act as a counter in a coal mine. This kind of stuff is super, super simple to automate today. You can write a bunch of Terraform code. I must say that the Terraform that you see as a background has nothing to do with honey tokens. It's just a show, okay? But the thing is that you can for those of you who are familiar with Terraform, you can already tell it's very, very easy to generate some accounts, to create access tokens of these accounts, and essentially put them into a Lambda function. They're not used for anything, really. They're just there. You can put them in Docker containers. You can just put them anywhere else that you like. But the whole point is that as soon as you see someone using those tokens, you know this is a malicious activity right away. And in fact, you can automate it as much as actually blocking access as soon as you see someone actually using that token. Another similar example, darknets. Not many people, I've actually spoke to quite a few companies that have a DevSecOps model in their organizations, or at least they claim they have, and they haven't heard of darknets. And I think this is quite of a oversight, and I think maybe we haven't done enough education. But the whole point of a darknet is that when I build my infrastructure and I create my virtual private cloud or whatever, I can segment the different layers of the application, but what I can do also, I can leave gaps in between, like a small subnets between the normal, for example, virtual private network. And so what these dark subnets do, well, nothing. That's the whole point. The whole point is that they're completely dark. They have nothing in there. They don't have resources. They don't have servers. They have nothing in there. But if I see any activity on those networks, it's indication that something dodgy is going on. This is not a function of the application. So again, super trivial to automate, as you can imagine. CloudFormation, Terraform, you can pretty much set this up on every environment that you can imagine, from Azure to Google Cloud. And we can set up these networks. And the thing is that we can analyze the traffic quite easily these days, again, with some very basic supporting infrastructure. And that traffic would tell us as soon as we see activity in there, we can take a very proactive approach. We don't need to notify someone to actually kick off an incident response on that. What we can do, quite literally, block access almost immediately. And last but not least, recon. Again, if you follow some of the bug bounty programs and you see the kind of bugs that are disclosed, you will find out that there is a recurring theme all over the place. And the theme is that people we end up exposing a misconfigured infrastructure in the most ridiculous possible ways. So what attackers and what every bug hunter does these days, it has a job that continuously monitor all the bug bounty programs, new domains, new buckets, new everything, and that's like a 24/7 monitoring. So why do we not do this as part of our infrastructures? Again, there is almost zero cost of doing that. Tools are readily available. Most of them are open source. And all we need to do is just orchestrate it a little bit with some, some CloudWatch events, starting a container, runs a simple job with off-the-shelf tool, and essentially ping us back on Slack, if you find something. It's quite easy to do that. And so these solutions, probably you found out they're actually quite generic. And so if we all go ahead and just do all this stuff on our own, we're going to basically rediscover the same thing at the same time. Some of us probably will do it better than others, but at the end of the day, the solution is the same. And so what the Open DevSecOps project is designed to do is to actually create those mini solutions, if you like, that can be used almost as off-the-shelf tools. You can just plug them in directly into your organization, and they're open source. So there's no cost associated with it, apart from maybe the cost that you need to pay for using these resources. And this is kind of a map, maybe of some ideas that we can even take it even further. From creating static code analyzers to actually doing some research papers, cloud formation. Keep in mind that if you have seen the top web application vulnerabilities in 2007, there was a list that came out not too long ago. These are all new stuff that probably nobody thinks about at the moment. And so if you have people working on the offensive side of things, they can pick up these things and essentially produce them almost as a ready-made solutions that can be directly integrated into other people's infrastructure. And so what's the goal? Well, the goal is the goal. And basically there's no goal. The goal is potentially to make something cool, I think, at the end. But also the goal is to solve this problem because, again, it's a recurring theme. And as I started initially, we've got this idea of shifting to the left. It becomes almost like, it's tiresome to actually explain this. But funny enough, several years ago, I was speaking to someone who I know who has a pen testing company, and he actually told me that, and now I can reference back after so many years. He said, the way I see it is that pen testing will become less and less relevant over the next several years. That's what he said, right? And it did actually trigger to me at that point. I realized, yeah, sure, of course, with the amount of automation we are throwing in, it's less valuable as it used to be, right? And the whole point is to essentially shift all these services that we have from vulnerability research to pen testing to bug hunting, which basically shift them into the onto the left, basically automate as much as we can, so that we don't need to worry about. But also, I think that what DevSecOps is all about, and again, maybe some of you will disagree with me, but I think it's about this sort of three things. And the idea is that when we write software, and again, this will largely depend on the kind of projects you're involved with, but when you're writing software, you essentially want your solution, whether it's a network, whether it's a software product, you want to be self-governing. In other words, it needs to be, it needs to govern itself in terms of allocates its own access, provides access controls and everything else. Basically, you should do it by itself, logging and everything else. It needs to be self-healing. Now, we talk about self-healing when we talk about, scaling, We're saying, okay, yeah, if I kill the server, I need to get another server almost automatically. We're not actually using this terminology in reference of security, right? I mean, self-healing means that, okay, if I detect someone, probing my darknet coming from IP address XYZ, this means that they're in that subnet and I just kill off access to that subnet. That's self-healing, okay, in terms of security. And also self-defending, which kind of is on the same spectrum of things. And so, I think I'm okay for time. You can find me on Twitter. I managed to snap this really, really short name, PDP. And so check me out. Funny enough, actually, I got also a lot of Nigerian spam. Allegedly, apparently, PDP is also the People Democratic Party of Nigeria, and everybody hates me. So I believe that I am the real Nigerian prince. And I basically represent these three organizations, which are all different projects that I've used in my career: Guinness Citizen, Web Security, and SecOps. And I can take questions. We've got 10 minutes. No? Okay, there's no questions. I'm going to leave this for a couple of seconds then. Cool. Well, thank you very much.